Paid parental leave is an important productivity measure that is good for families, it is good for workplace productivity, and it assists women in the workplace with realistic choices if they want to combine work with family and still to continue their career. However, the current paid parental leave scheme introduced by the former Labor government in 2010 is not actually so good for businesses in Australia, because in its current form it requires employers to be the pay clerk for a scheme which is government funded for eligible long-term employees. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Coalition Government supports the provision of paid parental leave, which is why we took to the election a commitment to deliver a genuine paid parental leave scheme that will give working mothers 6 months or 26 weeks leave based on their actual wage, rather than the former Labor government scheme, which is paid at the minimum wage for 18 weeks. It's a good policy, and I support it because it is good for women, it is good for families, it is good for the economy at large, and as such it is good for families and workplaces in my electorate of Robertson on the Central Coast. And part of our paid parental leave policy, in contrast to the former Labor government's policy, was to ensure that paid parental leave can be paid directly by the Commonwealth Government and not just via their employer. The bill we're debating today fulfils this commitment by legislating to remove from the 1st of July this year the mandatory requirement for employers, including small businesses, Mr Deputy Speaker, who struggle under the weight of red tape and regulation that took a stranglehold on this nation over the last 6 years of the former Labor government, removing this requirement and placing the requirement back onto the Commonwealth through the Department of Human Services, unless there is a prior mutual agreement with both the employer and employee to opt in for the workplace entitlement to be paid for by their place of work. Labor's scheme has imposed an unnecessary administrative burden on employers and businesses, and I know from talking with hundreds of businesses in my electorate of Robertson that the current requirement to act as a pay clerk has increased costs for businesses, many of whom have had to absorb and wear the costs that have arisen as a result of additional paperwork and doing things like restructuring their businesses and their record-keeping systems to comply. And it's no small cost, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's come with a hefty price tag of around $48 million, a price tag that has been worn by our small business sector and our not-for-profit sector for far too long. In New South Wales alone, the estimated cost of compliance borne by businesses for the fiscal year 2012 to 2013 was almost $14.4 million. Many business owners I've spoken with on the Central Coast have shared their frustrations about the additional workload the current administration of the paid parental leave scheme places on their staff, and oftentimes on themselves in the absence of being able to absorb the financial or human resources cost of the current arrangements. And so this bill is a sensible amendment to the current scheme. Indeed, there's absolutely no reason why the paid parental leave scheme should not have continued to have been administered by the Family Assistance Office, who performed the task for the first 6 months when the scheme first started. The Coalition Government is determined to cut the red tape and regulatory burden on business in Australia, to get the monkey off the back of business owners who are the job generators of our nation, and to reduce the impact of the weight of the burden of more than 22,000 new or amended regulations imposed on Australians and Australian businesses and not-for-profit organisations by the former government. We support better regulation, Mr Deputy Speaker, not more regulation, and this bill is a sensible amendment to an important productivity provision for Australia. Perhaps it's because this bill is such a sensible amendment to the current scheme that Labor have previously blocked it, voting it down twice when they were in government and then moving to block the amendment again in the Senate earlier this year. But it's a fact that unnecessary regulation and red tape increases costs on business, which in turn costs families and people in my electorate of Robertson, because too much red tape, too much unnecessary regulation costs jobs. I point out, Mr Deputy Speaker, that this bill does not remove the right of employers to continue to administer the payment of paid parental leave if they've found this to be beneficial to both their business and their employee or employees. They may continue to do so. What we are doing is creating an opt-in approach, not an all-in requirement. So what this bill provides for is choice. And in empowering business owners to make choices that they deem to be best for them and their employees, we're empowering them to spend more time building their businesses, supporting their employees, and giving them even more opportunity to grow, to thrive, to succeed and to prosper. In doing so, Mr Deputy Speaker, our government is helping businesses create even more jobs and more opportunities for Australians. Creating more employment opportunities is something I'm particularly passionate about because in my electorate, and indeed across the Central Coast, our youth unemployment rate is just too high and local job opportunities are not where they need to be. Today, Mr Deputy Speaker, 30,000 to 40,000 commuters have left their home early this morning and they'll return home late at night to their families because their job opportunities require them to work in Sydney or Newcastle. That's why it's important that this bill be supported in the House. We don't want to waste a single minute of opportunity for businesses who may no longer want to be pay clerks because they want to be pay creators. Mr Deputy Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.